Postcode wars, an epidemic that the UK suffers from, which has resulted in a number of deaths over the past couple of decades. But it isn't just gang members or people who are involved in these ongoing feuds that have had their lives taken away. Even people who are minding their own business, who have absolutely nothing to do with any of these situations, have gone on to be murdered, sometimes even in broad daylight. If you look like someone who someone has an issue with, or if you're simply in the wrong place at the wrong time, it can cost you your life, and that is the sad reality of these postcode wars. Postcodes, for anyone who doesn't know, is basically the same thing as a zip code, and the wars that go on throughout the UK, but more specifically London, is the result of multiple things, drugs being one of the main. But the vicious cycle which we see nowadays is the result of people going on to be murdered, and the other side retaliates, and you know the rest of the story. But this story takes us over to northwest London, where two rival areas have been going at it for some time now, and that would be 3BP out of Hendon and 9th Street out of the Graham Park estate in Colindale. At around 9 PM on the 5th of September 2020, 20-year-old Anthony Adekola had just finished his shift at the Marks & Spencer store on Capitol Way in Colindale, only a short distance from his home. You see, Anthony Adekola had absolutely nothing to do with any gangs, and he simply just worked at that Marks & Spencer store. Unfortunately though, he wouldn't make it home on that night. Only 20 minutes earlier, gang members from the Hendon area would be seen getting into two separate taxis, heading for Colindale for what can only be described as a ride out, or in simpler terms, going to a rival area thirsty for blood. As Anthony was approaching home on Booth Road, both he and the two taxis filled with 8 people would cross paths. The 8 got out of the taxis, told the taxi drivers to wait one moment, and some words were exchanged between the parties. But the thing was, again, Anthony wasn't known to them, and vice versa. It's unclear what exactly was said, but either that conversation or some kind of instinct that had kicked in made Anthony make a run for it. He would make his way along Booth Road and into an alleyway heading towards his home. At the mouth of this alleyway was 3 stone bollards, and unfortunately for Anthony, he had ran into one of them, which would make him fall to the ground. Although he did get back up onto his feet and continued to run on, the fall had allowed the chasing group to make ground, and they started to gain on him. The group would continue to chase Anthony up Martlesham Walk, that alleyway, and eventually they caught up with him. CCTV didn't capture what happened next, but from what we know, he was subjected to a brutal attack. He was stabbed at least 9 times to the face, head, neck, back, arms, and in one of his legs. The stab wound to his neck had cut through his jugular vein, and then after they left Anthony for dead, they were described as trotting away from the scene, back to their taxis, and then they all went home. But as time passed, friends and families became concerned about Anthony's whereabouts, as at this point he hadn't been home for a couple of hours. After retracing his steps, Anthony's brother and some of his friends would find him slumped, bleeding out, dying in that alleyway. Emergency services were called a short while after, and they arrived at around 11:15 PM. They would go on to say that he was surrounded by people attempting to apply pressure to that neck wound. Paramedics took over soon after, but despite their best efforts, he was pronounced dead around 30 minutes later at 11:45 PM. In the days that followed, Snapchat messages had started to circulate saying, quote, "This is for your own safety. Graham Park and Hendon are having a war because of the stabbing that happened. R.I.P. Lizzie," which was Anthony's nickname. So when you finish school, no more concourse, it's straight home, because if Hendon man catch you, it's peak because they don't care. These messages had been recovered by police from a 17-year-old boy's phone who had been arrested and charged in connection with the incident, along with another 17-year-old and 20-year-old Tajon Subaran. In a recent trial at the Old Bailey, court documents had started to circulate and all too familiar circumstances were noted. After the murder had taken place, drill lyrics were written by one of the 17-year-olds, which would go on to say, quote, "I want to go to the 9 and set it, catch me and up and queff it. They took bro, so I'm gonna get them back." But of course, as you know, Anthony wasn't involved in this ongoing dispute. He just simply lived in the area where Hendon's rivals lived. In court, it was also heard that police recovered text messages from one of the 17-year-old boy's phones, and it was from his mother on the morning after the murder telling him to come home and accusing him of taking her knives. A black face mask was dropped at the scene, which was also linked to that same 17-year-old by his DNA. Tejon Subaran was said to have helped book the taxis for the ride out, and he was charged after blood had been found on his trainer that matched Anthony's. But the CCTV would pretty much have all three banged to rights after they were identified from the clothes that they had been wearing. And after a trial at the Old Bailey, all three were found guilty of Anthony's murder, and they are to be sentenced at a further date in November. But it is believed that the jury failed to reach a verdict on another person, and the prosecution is currently deciding whether to seek a retrial in his case. And so we're here once again, and I'm being very serious when I say this. Why are innocent people being targeted time and time again just because of where they live? Imagine wanting to do something with your life away from gangs, but you end up falling victim to an ongoing feud, again just because of where you live. It really saddens me to think that literally because of where you're located, you can have a huge target on your back. This is the second case now within a couple of weeks that has came out where two young men with a lot of potential behind them have gone on to lose their lives. David in Newham and now Anthony in Colindale. When does it stop? When will these gang members stop targeting innocent people who are just going about their business? It's bad enough they want to go out and kill each other in broad daylight, but this violence against people who aren't involved in gangs has just got to stop. But give the video a like for more crime related content like this, and make sure you hit the subscribe button if you haven't. It's been me, Ape Huncho, and I'll see you in the next one.